Okay, as folks start piling into the room pretty quickly, I'll say good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Depending on where in the world you're signing in from today, I see at least 6 time zones on the registration list, so I'm trying to be as expansive as possible in my greeting. I'm joined today by Oliver Friesen, CEO of Guardian Metal Resources, for a discussion on recent assay results at the company's tungsten project in Nevada. Oliver, how are you today?
I'm doing well, Romeo. How are you?
Good, thank you. So for the folks in the room, here's how today's going to work. I got some questions for Oliver that I'm going to run through, but today is an interactive event. So if you have any questions about recent results, there's a chat button on the bottom right of your screen. Please enter at any time during today's event questions that you got, and I'll try to tackle them towards the end of today's event. If for whatever reason I don't get to your question, we ran out of time, it was covered already, etc. I'm so glad you asked it because I'll make sure it gets to the Guardian team and they'll be able to get back to you with your email or phone number that you've entered into our system as soon as possible. Last piece of housekeeping, today's event is being recorded and will be available for replay in the early afternoon Eastern time. So that's the mid-evening for those of you in BST. Awesome. So I think that's it for housekeeping. So I'm going to get into the protein of today's event, if you don't mind, Oliver. Now, having read through your release, I see multiple high-grade zones now confirmed at Tempiute. So what's your prioritization strategy for advancing those discoveries? Are you going to look at the East Zone's 1.2% or take a broader approach across all the mineralized areas?
Yeah, I mean, I would say in general, we take a broader approach. We look at everything and we try to push everything forward in parallel. With that being said, there are zones that are more attractive out of the gate. East Zone, I think, is one that stands out because historically really hasn't been explored or touched. I mean, there's a bit of historic activity. But the key thing is if you look at the map, and actually I'll just quickly pull it up if I can, 1 second, because I think it'll be quite handy. Not very technically savvy, I apologize. Here, I'll pull up this here, see if that works. Can everyone see that now?
That looks like the PR you got up right now. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. So we'll just scroll down here. So what we have are multiple zones now confirmed. So what you see here, if you can see my mouse, maybe not. So there's the south stock, which we've listed as fertile, which means it's a stock that is proven that it has the right geochemical signature to host a pore-free system. So that's an exciting development in its own right. But you'll see there, we pointed to the historically mined areas. Now that's typically where they were extracting ore in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, intermittently 70s, and then most recently in the 80s. So you'll see there the scale. So that's about, if you look at the actual scale bar, it's about maybe 1.5 kilometers as you wrap around that stock in a north-south orientation. So there's about 60 years of production coming from those areas alone. And then what you do is you just look over to the north stock. So we're just kind of northeast of where we just were. That's the East Zone now. So what we found, and you'll see similar scale bar, about 1.5 kilometers north-south of skarn-rich tungsten, copper, silver, zinc mineralization, which is really, really intriguing because you have, as you can see, a very similar footprint that has not really been looked at. So what we're looking at is how big could this property be? Where can we find new material from? Well, there's a lot of material still existing in historically mined areas, a lot. It has only been mined down about 300 meters. So there's a huge amount of material at surface and also down dip just within that zone there. But also the East Zone, if we continue to work there and find interesting material, that could be a whole new zone. You can see just similar scale to what we have in the southwestern part there, the historically mined areas. So to answer your question, the East Zone certainly stands out right now. With that being said, the Worthington Zone, that's just an area that we kind of went to on a whim and to see 2.66%, at surface and in about a 300 to 400 meter long skarn zone. There's a lot here. I think the key takeaway for investors should be that this is clearly a sizable mineralizing system. It's one of the more important, tungsten districts in the U.S. and hasn't been looked at since the late 80s, since China flooded the market with cheap tungsten. So, we're 40 years out and no one's gone back in and said, hey, what's going on here? Is there more material? What's the broader story here? So, we think we're kind of just scratching the surface here in the East Zone, Worthington, the stockpiles, the tailings, you name it. We're going to push all of those things forward in tandem effectively. And we'll see what comes out first, but a lot of exciting things to push forward there.
No, appreciate that extra context for sure. Now, one thing I noticed you mentioned in the PR is that the stockpiles are truck ready and could represent the only domestic primary tungsten source in the US. Curious if you could just walk us through that.
Yeah, so truck ready effectively just means it's material at surface that's already been extracted. So it's built up piles of rubbles and stones and boulders and you name it. So it's stuff that they had mined historically in the 80s. And then what happened was, as I mentioned, China flooded the market in the late 80s. And the price of tungsten, I don't remember the price at the time, but it was more than cut in half, I believe. So effectively that operation, which was owned and operated by Union Carbide, stopped. Pretty much one day it was operating, the other day they're like, we're not doing this anymore because the price had decreased so much. And just maybe to add to that, and I know investors kind of go, oh, well, what if China does that again? Well, just to be clear, they're doing the opposite. They've actually shut the taps off. So it would actually go against the current geopolitical climate for them to then turn the taps on and flood it. I don't think they're in a position to do that anymore. In fact, they're looking to withhold tungsten from the US and other Western world countries, which is the reason the price is going up so much. So those stockpiles, they were extracted material from the 1980s operation. What they do is they mine it, and then they store it in stockpiles near to the mill site typically, and then they can pull that material and actually process it. So because the mine shut down so abruptly, you have these truck-ready stockpiles of material, and obviously some really interesting grades in that material. We took a bunch of samples this program, lots of high-grade tungsten there, some zinc as well. We did another sampling program a few months ago, some material up to 125% WO3. Also some really consistent and intriguing gallium numbers in those stockpiles as well. So what we do now is we need to now quantify kind of how much is there. So we know that there's some really interesting grades in those stockpiles. We need to quantify how much material is there. We have a rough idea. I won't quote it right now, but we need to come up with a more robust estimate as to what's actually there in terms of volumes and tonnage. And then what we're looking at is, okay, where could we process that material? And what is the time frame? Because as I mentioned, and as you mentioned, that production from those stockpiles would represent currently the only domestic mine production of tungsten. There's no other active mine in the US right now. And the US is import reliant on materials. So that could represent a really important source of domestically mined tungsten. So that's why there's such a unique opportunity there, one that we're trying to understand and push forward. Now, there's a few options. Number one, we have the historic mill and mill site, right? That is, all the infrastructure is usable, but we need to build out a whole new processing facility. And really what we're looking to do there is that processing facility would be built up for commercial production of the bigger prize here, which is the actual hard rock deposits that we have at Tempiute. So, however, that can be done sooner to accompany or to manage the processing of the stockpiles that exist there right now. Other potential options are you could go with a sort of a pilot plant, a smaller operation to process that material. And then a third option could be toll milling. So if you could find a nearby mill, you can scoop that material up, you put it in trucks and you ship it away, or you truck it away to a nearby toll mill effectively. So there's a few options there. We don't know which route we would look to push forward. The key was getting the results back, which are positive. We now need to quantify it. But at the same time, as you can imagine, with the engineers, we're kind of working through those three various options to figure out how quickly could we go, what is the potential revenue here versus the cost, and more importantly, how important is this mine source of material for the US? And the answer is very important for sure. So looking at the various options, we take things one step at a time at Guardian. We measure twice, we cut once. So we got to do things in a systematic order, but it's looking positive. So we'll continue to push that forward, and we'll certainly continue to discuss with the market as those results become known.
No, makes sense. Now, you mentioned gallium. The gallium discoveries appeared to me to be a sort of unexpected bonus, so you can correct me if that's wrong, with up to 100 parts per million in some samples. So from your perspective, how significant is the gallium potential commercially? And are you thinking of it as a primary revenue stream or more as like a byproduct credit?
This is a tungsten mine. There's no two ways about it. Tungsten is really what we're focused on here, but we'd be remiss to not look at everything and look at the broader picture here, which is, hey, if there's other metals that we can economically recover, that just increases the top line revenue. So we look at everything. Gallium is an interesting one because there is military applications. Also, gallium, there's 100% of mined gallium comes from China right now. and gallium exports have actually been banned to the US. So very similar to tungsten in those respects. So there's a very strategic angle with gallium specifically. What's interesting about gallium, and the reason that we've sampled for it, is we bought the entire historic data set for Tempiute. And as we went through those old reports from the 60s and 70s and 80s, and at the time, gallium was not what it is now. Gallium at the time was not a high-tech metal they needed for, all the use cases they have it for now. So what was interesting was looking at those reports for a mining company in the 60s, 70s, 80s to continually reference in multiple occasions abnormally high gallium results. So for whatever reason, they assayed for it and said, hey, there's some really high gallium here, but they just didn't do anything with it because it wasn't even close to what it is today. But the whole landscape has shifted completely. So we look at that and just to read in the reports abnormally high gallium multiple times. Okay, well, we're going to sample for gallium. And sure enough, up to 100 ppm, that's high-grade gallium. I encourage listeners to go and find other companies that have reported results up to 100 ppm. Now, as with everything, one of the key elements here is the recoverability. Where is the gallium hosted, and can we actually pull it out economically? That is still a question that we need to answer. We know the numbers are there. We know it's very, very anomalous and very high in a lot of these skarn samples, which is great. If you just take the actual value of gallium right now per, what you calculate is sort of a dollar per ton value, it's quite material. If you just take it at 100% recovery, if you take the current price, call it 40, 50, 60, 100 grams per ton or ppm gallium, it's significant. But the key is, can you actually recover this stuff and produce it? There is gallium that you'll find in spodumene and other deposits worldwide. It's not possible to recover that stuff. However, there is a proven pathway to recover gallium from sphalerite, which is a zinc mineral. And I believe there's a project in Canada that is currently working on that now. So we also have zinc in these skarn zones. We have sphalerite. So what we're looking at now is, where does that gallium sit? Is it in the sphalerite? Is it somewhere else? And then more importantly, the next step, which is, can we recover it economically? Once again, this is a tungsten property. There's no two ways about it. But we'd be remiss to not go and say, hey, we have really high gallium. Let's figure out the metallurgical aspect here to see if we can recover this. Because if we could, based on the numbers, even if you could recover 50% of it, it's very material to the top line revenue. And also, it really increases the strategic nature of the asset when you have tungsten and also gallium plus the other metals as well. So yeah, really nice added bonus. We got to continue to work on it and see where that sits and how we can recover it. But also in the tailings as well, we found some really interesting gallium results. So there's a lot of gallium in the system, and now we take it to the next step, which is the mat work and figuring out where it sits and how to recover it.
Awesome. Now there are some great questions in the chat. Give me 2 seconds. I'm just going to go through the ones that I've still got, but do please keep them coming. I noticed that your rock chip sampling has identified extensive mineralization over 1,300 meters strike length, but you did note that there's no evidence of past drilling in the new zones. So what's your drilling strategy to convert these surface showings to a more defined resource?
Yeah, so that's what we're working on now. The strategy really is, and just geologically, I won't bore you to death here, Romeo, but effectively, what we're looking at is a skarn. So a skarn deposit is associated with limestone or marble rocks, so the reactive rocks. Skarns are associated with porphyries. So porphyries are the main intrusion. They're the main heat engine, the main fluid driver for porphyry deposits. So the same porphyry deposits you find all across Western North America, British Columbia, Alaska, you name it. Those are the big copper moly systems that we mine the majority of the world's copper from. So what we have at Tempiute and also at Pilot Mountain are what are called the causative porphyry. So it's the porphyry that brought all the mineralization or all the juice. So we have at Pilot Mountain, we have porphyry south, which is the causative porphyry for our main zone there. And at Tempiute, we've now confirmed that the two porphyries that you see, North Stock and South Stock, are fertile, which means they're causative, which means they are the actual intrusions that brought all the fluid in and allowed for the formation of the skarns. So what I'm trying to get to is the fact that when you have a causative porphyry, you look around the margins of that porphyry for your skarn systems. So if you look at the map again, the South Stock on the west side, you'll see all of the skarn wraps around the porphyry. So what you simply do is you step away from the porphyry, you drill towards it, and you hit your skarn zone. So the drilling methodology for the east zone is very similar. We know we can map the intrusion. We know that there's scarring that exists around that contact zone. So what you do is you just drill across it, right? It's very simple drilling. What we'll do is we'll put a series of holes there. We know where the surface showings are. Now, the really exciting thing is, and if you notice, I mentioned this about the south stock, porphyry deposits and porphyry intrusions can be, in vertical space, can go up multiple kilometers. They're not sort of these small little pod-like intrusions. They can be very big at depth and extend for kilometers through the subsurface. So what that means is that that whole contact zone is of interest, right? Because you're looking for that contact between the porphyry and where you find your scar. So I'm rambling here. I saw you yawning there, Romeo. I caught you. On the north, on the east zone specifically, what we have is this confirmed scarnet surface up to 1.2%, and we have the entire contact zone with the intrusion now staked. So we staked it all ourselves, 100% owned. So we're going to continue to drill along that contact zone at depth to see what's down there, how far the surface showings extend, and then we can start to build and figure out what exactly that looks like over time. So that's kind of the methodology. It's a long-winded answer, but hopefully that helps give context.
I love all the extra geo info. Actually, I think it's helpful for context. People sorting it out at home. I do want to zoom out and ask a kind of strategic question. So as we talked about already today, and I've talked about with you before, current U.S. tungsten is really dependent on foreign sources currently. So how are you positioning Guardian Metal with potential government or defense industry offtake partners, given the kind of strategic nature of tungsten moving forward?
Yeah, so the key thing is, if you look at the U.S. landscape, what is unique to tungsten compared to a lot of other metals, critical defense metals, is that the downstream capacity exists. That's important, and it's quite rare, because if you look at the metals like antimony, look at rare earths, one of the big issues you have is, even if you mine that metal on U.S. soil, the ability to take a concentrate of those metals and convert it or process it into a usable product for the military, for industry, doesn't exist in the U.S. And what your listeners potentially have noticed is, in a lot of these executive orders, they talk about the mining aspect, but also, just as important, the processing. We need to work on both, because if you don't have one, what's the point of mining if you're going to send it to China anyway? So the very unique thing about tungsten, and one of the reasons we love tungsten so much, is the fact that the downstream exists. So we have an LOI offtake signed with a company called Global Tungsten and Powders, GTP. Now, they own the largest tungsten processing facility outside of China. What that means is that if and when we're able to produce concentrate from our projects, we have an agreement then to ship or rail that material from our site, the concentrate, to GTP, where they take it and convert it into downstream and midstream usable products. So tungsten oxide, tungsten APT, tungsten metal powder, all of the products that then the Lockheed Martins, the Raytheons, the Boeings, the Schlumbergers, the Baker Hughes need. So we don't need to get too cute with it, because we have an LOI with GTP who can process our material. Now we need to formalize that, move that into a definitive agreement, but we already have a place on US soil for that material to go. And we have an agreement or an LOI that outlines what we'd be paid for delivering that material. So the key thing is, the only thing missing from the US right now in the tungsten landscape is the mine source. That's the thing that's missing, right? Because you have the processing, but all the material coming in right now is from foreign sources, because there's no mines. So if we can plug in that mine source, that completes the supply chain. So once again, we've already positioned ourselves. We just need to get now to the point where we can produce a concentrate and it can go to GTP. There are other off-takers in the US that can process as well. So what we've done is we've strategically, we don't want to commit all of our material or future material to one company. We want to keep our options open. So if there's other offtakes that we want to sign directly with government partners or with other off-takers, we are in a position to do so. But at least having that first initial LOI signed shows that, hey, there's a viable pathway for us to actually take this material from Nevada, turn it into usable tungsten products that, the military or other industries in the US can use.
It's good to be the crucial missing link, obviously.
It is, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
there you go. And I got one question from the chat that I'm going to sneak in here because I think it's right on topic. But Graham asks, how does the recent budget impact defense metals? And they're curious if Guardian will be in production during Trump's term.
Yes. So our goal is, and we wouldn't say this unless we thought it was possible, is to have both of our projects in production before Trump leaves office. So we have built a portfolio where we believe we can move quickly, and that's for a good reason, because we understand there's a tremendous window now with the current administration. There's tremendous tailwinds here, and it's our job to move quickly to deliver material, a win for the current administration and for us and for our shareholders as well. So that's what we're working towards. Sorry, what was the first part of the question, Romeo?
It was if the most recent budget impacts defense metals.
Oh, the budget. Yes, of course. So that's the timeline. The big beautiful bill, which I think is about to get, or it's working through the system right now. I don't know where it's at. I think there was one of the approvals it got yesterday. The only thing I can flag from the big beautiful bill that I know of is there is money allocated in that bill for what's called the DPA 3 program, Defense Production Act.
Okay.
And the DPA is set up it's part of the Department of Defense, and the DPA is a body that's able to govern and allocate funds to domestic defense metal projects, and that money can be used to then spend it on the ground. And the ultimate goal of that program is to help speed up projects through to production by saying, hey, here's non-dilutive grant funding, just crack on with it, get this project moving. So the only thing that I know about the big beautiful bill, a lot of things in there would never affect us. It's a lot of other things covered, but the DPA, I believe, I was told there's about $1 billion of funding outlined in the big beautiful bill. So that means that the DPA 3 program, and there's money in the coffers right now. I don't quote me, but I think it's about 1.4 billion ballpark, and this is all public information. I'm not disclosing anything that's not in public domain. This is you can search this up yourself, but I believe there now. And if the big beautiful bill goes through, there's another ballpark $1 billion. So double check those numbers, but I believe that is the case, and that's what I was told. So effectively, the DPA 3 program will have further funds to deploy defense metal projects on U.S. soil. So that's probably the only thing that comes to mind that could affect Guardian.
No, great. I think that's a really good answer. Now, I want to throw back to the projects for a second. So given the scale of opportunity across Tempiute, the East Zone, and Worthington, what level of capital investment do you anticipate for the next phase of development, and how is that aligning with your funding strategy?
Yeah, so we take things one step at a time. We want to de-risk and then move on to the next phase. So the next key step for us, well, there's multiple things ongoing, but I'd say the biggest step for us is resource definition. So now we have the East Zone confirmed. We have that ground staked. We're doing a lot of work mapping historic body geological resource at the main area, so the kind of the West Zone. So what we're doing is we're building a 3D geological model. We're preparing for drilling. And that's the next key step here, is drilling towards a resource. So we want to understand how much material is there and at what grade, and where is that located depth-wise. So the next key step for us is the resource drilling and putting together a resource which can say, hey, 43-101 compliant, we have X million tons at X grade. So that's the next key step, because once we have the resource confirmed, then we can start to work on the engineering aspect of that. So how does that align with our funding strategy? We had a recent warrant expiry period that brought in substantial cash to the business. There's also other avenues we're looking at for funding drilling across our project. So we're very prudent with spend. All the money we really raise goes towards advancing our projects, and our semi-annual reports will reflect that. So what we do is we look at our cash balances and we figure out where can we allocate funds and what is going to deliver the biggest value driver for our investors. So we're drilling that pilot right now, and we're looking at, okay, where's funding at, and how can we manage the next kind of phase of work at Tempiute. So we always maintain a strong cash balance, ensuring that we can push forward to the next subsequent stages. And as I'm sure your listeners know, and our listeners, we're pre-revenue business. So obviously there is time to bring in, strategic capital when you can, or trying to tap into some of the government tailwinds as well to help get us moving forward and quickly towards production, which is our ultimate goal here.
Awesome. And one thing I want to just talk about the tungsten system generally. So the Worthington discovery, 34 kilometers north, it shows grades up to 2.66%. I'm curious, does this suggest a larger regional system than previously understood? And does that change how you think about your overall Nevada strategy beyond Tempiute and Pilot Mountain?
Yeah, to answer your first question, yes. And that's why we looked at that area in the first place. So there's certain geological layers that we have, which the benefit of having an existing property with known at-surface mineralization is you can look at the various indicators that are lighting up over your existing resource or your existing area. And then what you do is you can say, okay, well, are we seeing that same signature elsewhere within the district? What we know is that this is a significant tungsten district in the US, which typically means you have a big plumbing system, a big mineralizing system. And you're not going to find just a small little pot and that's it. You're going to find other areas of interest. And we're seeing this on Pilot Mountain as well. It's a bigger system than I think was realized previously. So Worthington was just us scratching the surface. It was, our geologist saying, hey, I've done some work and it looks like this actually area could be of interest. So sure enough, I said, yeah, go spend it. I think you only spent maybe a half day there. But sure enough, 2.66%. I mean, that's high grade stuff. So what we do now is we've staked it. That's key. And now, we will certainly, for the next phase of work, which should be launching soon, we're going to go and follow up on that zone and try to really understand what we have there. Potentially there's a bigger system that we need to chase in that part of the world. But the key thing is, when you look at these distances, we're not 100 kilometers away. We're trying to find things that could all kind of cohesively come together and could potentially be part of a synergistic sort of operation. So that's within scale. It's not too far away. So we look at opportunities that could help augment and supplement what we have at Tempiute, which is a pretty significant system there with infrastructure and patented mining claims and the like. So it's just another feather in the cap, and we'll continue to look outside of the district to see what else is there as well.
Awesome. No, thanks. Just thought I'd ask. Now, there are some great questions in the chat that I haven't gotten to yet, so I wanted to throw to a couple of them just before we close today. I know that Sidgeberry asked, at what point will you stop adding resource to the PFS, although you'll probably know there's further resource to be added? So at what point do you call it for the PFS, I guess is the question.
He's referring to, he or she's referring to Pilot Mountain. Great question, and one that I've been getting multiple times now. So sure. It's one thing that we're working with the engineers right now. Now, I guess just to lay the kind of landscape here. So the person who asked the question is correct, that you need to at some point put a pin and say, okay, this is the data that will be included in the PFS, right? And when do you draw the line in the sand? Because number one, if you never draw a line in the sand, you're never going to deliver a PFS, which we need to do. We know that. At the same time, we have back of the napkin models. I mean, they're much more sophisticated than back of the napkin. We have very detailed spreadsheets where we can model what we think the economics are going to be. We can change variables and move things around. With the current price of tungsten as it is, so it's now over $450 an MTU or $45,000 a ton. What we do is we model, just to understand roughly what this could all look like. We model what we think we could produce from desert scheelite specifically. But then obviously we look at the other areas as well as we know information, and we actually try to model those in as well. So in theory, we have desert scheelite, which is our main at-surface open pitable resource. That's the one that is the most advanced at Pilot. But we've now been drilling garnet, right? We are not just a development company, we are an exploration company as well. We will always be doing both because that's how we really add value for investors. So what we've done is we've gone and drilled another zone that really has been overlooked historically. And once again, I talked and alluded to the fact that Pilot Mountain, there's a bigger system than I think was realized previously because all the work was going into desert scheelite. There wasn't enough resources and cash and time to look at the other zones. So we have garnet, gunmetal, and Good Hope. So there's three other at surface known tungsten, copper, silver, zinc zones. And the concept is, well, you could have a central mine, mill site, processing facility in the property, and you could be pulling material from desert scheelite as well as 1, 2, or 3 of the other zones. So you have one central processing facility, and you're pulling material and processing it at the same spot. What I'm trying to say is, because of the location of these deposits, it's very synergistic to be able to mine from multiple sources if the resource supports that. That's a key thing. Garnet, we've put out some visuals so far of the results there. I can't remember what we last reported, but we're almost done that drilling now. It's gone very quick, and it's gone, it's been a very efficient program, which is great. So what we're doing now is, as we kind of get some of these visual results, we can start to understand what this area looks like. And then, okay, well, now we know roughly how many tons are going to be there. We can visually estimate the grade. We can plug that into our model to figure out, hey, well, if we can actually ramp this up from X amount of tons per day to X times 2 or X times, whatever that number is, and run the numbers and figure out what that looks like in terms of your revenue, in terms of your operating costs, we can then try to understand it as a board, figure out, okay, what's actually going to be the best bang for our buck, right? Because if we can add some of those resources in, that could be a huge value driver for this project, for the economics, right? So there's as listeners know, mining is there's so many factors, there's so many levers that you can pull up and down, and when you kind of get them all fine-tuned to their perfect point, that can lead to the best outcome for investors in the project and everything else. So it's a long-winded way of saying, at Desert Chile, we're pushing forward with the PFS. There's no question about that. What we're trying to do subsequent to that is get as much data about Garfield and the other zones as well, to figure out how much more work do we need to do, and when could we add that data in without affecting the overall timeline of the PFS materially. Because we want to deliver the best PFS for the market. If we think there's other zones that could materially contribute, we want to look at those and find ways to get those added as quickly as possible. With that being said, at some point, obviously, you draw a line in the sand, you do a PFS on the data that you know, and then subsequent to that, as you continue to work on the other zones, they can be added to a subsequent PFS or an updated PFS or to the BFS. So that's a lot of kind of different ways to look at it, but Garnet is looking very interesting. We've been clear about that, and we're going to move on to gunmetal next. And that's another zone that really has been overlooked historically. So we're really looking at this holistically, and all the while we're taking Desert Chile and we're pushing forward the geotech, the mine plan, the block model, the resource. All that is moving forward while we try to get Garnet kind of up to speed and caught up effectively.
Right. As a follow-up question to that, Stitch Berry says, I thought at one stage you indicated the PFS was going to incorporate Pilot Mountain and Tempiute, but you just indicated it would be just Pilot Mountain. I'm just looking for your clarification there.
Separate, totally separate. Yeah. So Pilot Mountain and Tempiute, separate properties. They're about 200 miles away, so they will have separate economic models created. However, at Pilot Mountain, as I mentioned, we have multiple zones. So we have Desert Chile as our main zone, but we also have Garnet, Gunmetal, and Good Hope. So a PFS will incorporate at least Desert Chile and potentially some of the other zones if we can get that data up to par as quickly as possible. Tempiute is its own thing. So that will be its own economic engineering study. That will include historically mined resource areas, as well as anything else we find within the vicinity. So the East Zone is a very good target there. But first things first with Tempiute is establish the resource, updated resource, and then we move into the next stage, which is engineering.
Perfect. I know we're a little over time, but there's just a couple more questions if you got just a few.
Sure, yeah.
Perfect. Mike asks from the chat, and this is a bit of a crystal ball gazer, so it takes the best of your ability. But are there large companies out there that would purchase the whole working site, or do you think you'll have to deal with individual companies for each mineral?
So you wouldn't deal with individual companies for different minerals. You could have different offtakes for different minerals. So there could be one company who wants your tungsten, and one company who wants your copper, and one company who wants your silver and your zinc and your gallium. So you can have multiple offtakes for the different metals. However, you wouldn't find a company that wants to buy you for just one metal and then another company for another. So offtakes, yes, that can cover for you for the range of metals that you can provide and mine and recover. However, if you were to sell this, if there was a mining company interested, they would buy the whole thing effectively, if that makes sense.
No, that's great. S from the chat asks, what's the landscape look like for grant funding right now?
Yeah, good question. It's positive. I mean, I think if you look at the executive orders, you'll see that multiple executive orders have explicitly listed and talked about the desire to allocate federal funds to domestic defense metal projects. So I would say it's a very significant part of the administration's agenda, which is, hey, there's multiple things we need to do to get America working again. We need to help with permitting. We need to help with funding, right? We need to be able to fund and give resources to these companies and projects to help them move forward. Because as listeners know, capital markets can be challenging, right? So it's important that the government can step in and help support. And that's one of the reasons why China is the dominant miner of tungsten today. They have been subsidizing tungsten mines for a very long time because it's such a strategic metal for them. So federal funding is a big part of that. We've seen a lot of executive orders. So I would say the landscape for federal funding and for funding for defense metal projects is very, very strong. You look at Perpetua Resources as a good sort of blueprint as to what can happen if you have the right metal in the right jurisdiction at the right time. Antimony is what they're focused on, or gold and antimony, and they've received multiple rounds of funding through various agencies, including the DPA3 program. So that's a good blueprint to look at and say, hey, this is what a company who is aligned with U.S. interests and with the metal that is very important for national security, and that's what can happen. So that's to give you a handle on the landscape. I would say 10, 20 years ago, those funds weren't around and didn't exist. And as listeners know, so much of having success in this mining space is just getting the tailwinds and the timing right. So we're seeing an administration who cares deeply about mines in America, and Perpetua is a great example for what DPA and other government funding can do for a company like that. And just to create another parallel, Perpetua, it's mostly gold, but they have an antimony byproduct, and we're working on tungsten. Now, there's a lot of similarities between tungsten and antimony. In fact, they're probably two of the key input metals into the production of munitions. And I saw even yesterday an announcement that the U.S. is actually withholding the sale or the distribution of a lot of key munitions to the likes of Ukraine because the resources don't exist in the U.S. They don't have the inventory, which I think really highlights the importance of having domestic mine sources of the key metals needed to manufacture and create more munitions on U.S. soil. Without those metals, you can't do it. And if you're import reliance for your antimony and tungsten from unfriendly adversaries, you can do the math, right? So I think it really highlights once again how important it is for companies like Perpetua to focus on antimony in the U.S. and for us, tungsten, such a key metal for defense, but a huge wider range of other use cases that tungsten is needed for. So very, very critical right now. The landscape for funding is very strong, but also there's, like I said, there's permitting reform happening. There's a lot of reasons why investors are so keen on investing in U.S. mining of critical metals because the tailwinds are there, and that's what we're looking to tap into at Guardian.
The timing is certainly right. To wrap up today, and this is a question I always like to ask at the end. Look, we're into the second half of the year now. What should investors and prospective investors look forward to in the second half of the year for Guardian Metal? What are you excited about?
A lot of things. So certainly one thing just to flag is the government is kind of getting momentum now. They've been in their seats now for call it 5 months now. So now a lot of these executive orders, we're going to start to see what this actually tangibly means for mining companies. So I would definitely look out for all of those tailwinds and how they can directly affect and support companies like Guardian. So that's one thing I'd encourage investors to look at and look out for. And then project and company specific, we're busy. We have a huge operations team now. We've been drilling for more than 12 months now. Like we have not stopped. So we have more drilling results to come at Pilot Mountain. We have the entire Garnet zone as well. That drilling is almost done. So we'll have results coming from that. Obviously, the results of the various engineering studies ongoing for Pilot, and then obviously the culmination of those into a PFS. So all of those engineering works, but also at the same time, we're not just a boring development company. We are doing exploration. We are looking to expand resources. We're looking to grow this and show investors in the market and the government how big these properties and how important they really could be. So garnet, we're going to start drilling gunmetal next. So we'll have drill results from gunmetal. As I mentioned, we're looking to start up with drilling at Tempiute once we've finished the modeling of the 3D kind of body that we have there. All these new zones we've staked and discovered, pushing those forward as well. I mean, we are at all times pretty much running multiple exploration development work streams, which means those all lead to results from the company. So this result from Tempiute put out on Monday. I mean, there's 3-4 really exciting things for investors to kind of dig their teeth into, and then also the follow-up of all that. The fertile porphyry systems, we couldn't even fit that stuff in because it was going to get too technical and too long. So we're going to put that on a standalone so investors can understand the porphyry potential there as well. So a lot going on. If your listeners are new to the story, go to our website, go to our news release section, look through, start top to bottom, and you'll see how often we're putting out news. And it's not just fluff piece news. It's literally, here's results from work we've done. Here's results from work we've done. We don't stop. Right? I'm a young guy. We got a hungry team. We understand that we have a tremendous opportunity here in tungsten, being what we believe is the leader in U.S. exploration development of this very key metal. And we got a great window here with this new administration. So we are pushing hard. We're going fast. So lots of news across, multiple company aspects going forward here. So no time off for the team here at Guardian. But like I said, we've got a great opportunity, so we're going to go after it as hard as we can.
Awesome. Oliver, thank you so much for giving all the extra context for yesterday's press release. Everybody who joined, thanks so much for being with us today. There are, I think, just a couple of questions I couldn't get to, but I'll make sure that I send them to the Guardian team. They'll get back to you as soon as possible. But this is a great session. Oliver, thanks so much. Hope you have a great end of your day.
Yeah, this is great, Roman. I mean, this is hopefully a good way for us to highlight key news pieces going forward. So let's try to do this again and see what the feedback is. But yeah, it's good to talk through some of this stuff. I mean, a lot of the press we put out is quite technical. So to be able to talk through it a bit more granularly, hopefully gives investors a bit of a flavor. So lots to come, and let's do this again soon.
Look forward to chatting with you again soon, Oliver. Have a great day.
Good. Thanks, Romeo.